I'll explain that a little bit more in just a second. But just in case you didn't know, this is the vibe coding presentation. And many of you may know what vibe coding is, but just in case, it is using an AI LLM to give it instructions about what you want to have built without any regard for what code it is creating, and it just does what it does, and then you go cool vibes, and you tell it to keep going. So I think the strange thing about this presentation for me is if you'd asked me a year ago whether I would be doing a presentation about vibe coding, I would have said no way. Partly just look at me. I mean, I'm not a vibe coding kind of guy. I feel like I'm entering my Statler and Waldorf years. And if you don't know this reference, I think I've proved my point. Um, I'm I'm the kind of guy who learns about what's on TikTok from the Globe and Mail. Okay, so vibe coding is not necessarily for me. I was in the supermarket the other day, and a stranger came up to me and said I looked like the character from the Log Driver's Waltz. That was intended as a compliment, by the way. So anyway, yet I'm your vibe coding master for today to lead you through my experience. So I know that some of you have probably already experimented with these tools. So I'm going to kind of thread the line for like talking about something that was new to me and a few months ago that may be new to you, and for some it'll be old hat, and you'll be like, I've moved on to the latest models and the latest tools, and hopefully there'll be a happy medium for all of you here. So just speaking of the latest tools, this is a project that's several months old now. We're already on a new generation of LLMs. The tool that I was using sort of before everyone went nuts about Cloud Code that can run for a couple hours and do its own thing, and you can check in on it. So this is sort of like a little bit of a retrospective on some older tools, and your experience may be different with newer tools. And then I think I'd be remiss not to kind of talk about the sort of conflict, for me, the ethical and moral conflict of using AI tools. We know about the sort of the extreme energy use, although on the one hand, if you did a calculation for the time that I saved and the time that my computer was running, certainly it used a lot less energy overall to build the app, but that would only work if I closed my computer then for the rest of the week. So, but I probably had I would say it took me about 20% of the time than it would have taken if I'd done it by hand. So, so there's an interesting piece there. And then of course all the other pieces about whose companies are we feeding with when we're building AI products or AI assisted products. And then for me, as someone who comes from a coding background, just imagining this world where, coding is something that you could do for free. With these tools, you can use up your free credits, but, you start to think about, well, is this the end of the thing that I used to do? So, so it's with some trepidation. But I'll change topics here and just tell a little bit about myself. So I'm the managing director at Purpose Analytics. We're a nonprofit that supports other nonprofits to use their data more effectively. We've been around since 2020, and we mostly work exclusively in Canada, and mostly with community services type organizations or people serving organizations. And the type of work that we do are these kinds of consulting services. So it's mostly a social enterprise based enterprise, but we also are incorporated as a nonprofit so that we can work at the sector level and give back public benefit to the sector. So some of the things that we do is we run a nonprofit data network, which is kind of like Civic Tech, but for nonprofit people. We have another tool, which is a pre-AI assisted tool called Census Aggregator. You can check that out if you want. And coming soon, I hope to be back for another Civic Tech presentation. We're actually collaborating with a bunch of other nonprofits in the same space as us to bring the data maturity assessment that an organization called Data Orchard has stood up for about 6 or 7 years in the UK. It's a really fantastic tool for organizations to benchmark and um, validate where they are in their data journey. And so we're working with Data Orchard and some partners to bring that to Canada. Okay, so this actually is something that if you were at any of the Arts Council sessions when Mass Culture was here, you may recognize this dashboard. So we were a partner on helping to build this. This is a pre-AI assisted tool. And this past summer, we brought our team together at Purpose Analytics to start to investigate what are we going to do with these AI tools, because we're sitting there watching the AI world go by and trying to decide, well, what's our role in this? Do we stay away from AI entirely, or do we think about, well, how will the organizations that we work with, how can we help them benefit from AI in a way that's not helping them to build tools, but how can we help ourselves to do things for them that we wouldn't have been able to do at the same price point or the same speed. So we've really seen it through this lens of, can we do AI to use AI to boost what we're offering to our customers? And so the first experimentation as a team was, well, why don't we take a project we've already done and try to replicate that with an AI-assisted tool. So the tool we happened to use was Cursor, which some of you may be familiar with. It just happens to be a product that integrates the large language model into your development environment. I don't actually think there's a reason for that anymore. I think you can have your AI run separately and keep your development environment separate, and it doesn't need to be one product, but that's what we were using. And we asked it to try to build some of the things that we'd pre-built. And that, it's a little bit different when you know where all the pitfalls are, of course, but we learned a few things. We learned that the LLM, at least at the time, was not great at data analysis. Really, you need to step it along. It's not going to like run a piece of analysis to the end in a way that understands the context or makes any sense. We had some very comical design results. I wish I actually had some examples, but where we fed it this is the design and the palette that we want. Please make some charts, and it was like complete garbage. So that was kind of interesting. And some of you may have different experience with like design-focused LLMs. This was the coding tool trying to do that. But the thing that we did see was that for engineering tasks, like building up applications, and this dashboard happens to be built on Shiny, which runs on R. For building that, it was very good at creating the widgets and building the reactives and making all those connections for us. And it could see, it could sort of follow all the threads for debugging in ways that take a lot more time when you're sort of on your own and doing it manually. So the next test was, well, can we use this engineering? Because we use a lot of R Shiny, and if you do use R, you'll know it's like not great for deployment. It's not a scalable tool. It's great for prototyping, but if you want to have like 100 people hit a Shiny website at a time, you need a really expensive server to do that. So it's not something you would recommend. So one thing that we don't do at Purpose Analytics is we're not web developers, and we don't know all the JavaScript frameworks and how to do all that stuff. And so we sort of shied away from building that expertise. So what we thought is, well, what if we tested the LLM to see if it could build that for us? We know enough about code that we can like understand when it's written for us, but to build that from scratch, that would be a problem. So we wanted to test something that was different from something we'd done before. I needed a new problem. And that's where the swimming comes in. So I'm a very committed swimmer, and my pool was closed for maintenance for a month. And this creates a problem. And this is something that happens every year. And every year I go, oh, I need to build an app for myself that solves this problem. And every year I go, oh, that's going to be too big a lift for me to like, brush up on my React skills and build something in a tool that I, don't really know how to use. So this was the perfect opportunity. I had a swimming need. I had a work experimentation task and put those together, and we could have some gold. So this is what the problem that I was trying to solve is this. This is the City of Toronto's website. It does provide a map, so you can see where the pools are around you. Although, if you notice, I filtered for lane swim, and it's highlighting a splash pad for me. So it's sort of an imperfect mapping tool. But the task is, if you're looking for drop-in recreation activities near you, you have to click on every location and open up the schedule. And you have to do that one at a time and figure out, and then triangulate your schedule and decide, oh, which one's open when I want to be there. And there isn't a view, unfortunately. You know, websites can only, I'm not saying that the Toronto website's not doing what it should do. It's just there can only be so much to everyone, right? So in this case, you can't just get that like global view of where can I go when I need to swim. And so that was the idea. I was aware that there was good open data available for this, and it's refreshed on a regular basis. And in fact, the open data looks a lot like the website. For a while, I actually thought the open data powered the website, but I learned later that that's not true. So I embarked on building this with the LLM. And so the task that I set for myself is, I'm not going to touch the code at all. I'm just going to give it instructions and make it build things for me. So the first thing is, of course, decide what you're going to build in. And there are choices around technology stacks and stuff like that. So, you know, you can actually ask AI about that. What tech stack should I try building in? And then what happens is you move into this world of starting up, thinking about the prompts that you want. And, you know, as you know, prompt engineering, you may have heard that term as a thing, and asking the question in the right way is something that you get used to, I guess, or recognizing when your LLM is getting confused and doesn't know what to do, because it doesn't always tell you when it doesn't know. So the prompts for Cursor has two types of prompts. One is you tell it what kind of coder it is. So you create these rules. And there's actually a library of these rules, so you don't even have to write them yourselves. And I just sort of grabbed these. They're much longer than this, but I just grabbed these because I thought they were funny. We talk about how LLMs often like stroke our own egos, but apparently when you write rules for them, you need to stroke their egos too. So you got to be like, you know, you're a genius, and you know, but then you also have to say, you know, don't invent things. If you don't know the answer, don't guess. That doesn't quite work, but it's better than when it just goes off on its own. And then there's the prompt of what you want to do. And you can see this was a little bit longer, maybe another paragraph. And that was enough to get me to this. So it really was, and it was interesting because I told it where the data was, and it had trouble connecting to the data. So it just invented its own data set, and that was great. And that was great actually learning for us, because in our regular work, we work with sensitive data sets, which we can't send to an LLM. So it makes a lot of sense to create synthetic data sets. If your LLM can make it for you in a couple of seconds, it makes a lot of sense as a way to prototype. So needless to say, I did not like this. This is really ugly, and I didn't like it. So then we went to refactoring and refining it. So over time, this turned into one really long JavaScript file. So I told it to refactor, and it did a good job, but it broke what it did, which probably I would do if I refactored my code. I would also break my code and have to figure it out. So, you know, I don't know why I would expect the LLM to be doing anything better than me. I also switched to a different design tool rather than trying to use the coding tool. So it's just that, you know, these LLMs are primed for the task that they're supposed to do. So using your coding tool to give it design instructions doesn't work very well. So I happened to use a tool called Stitch, which was acquired by Google. And that, again, you give it a prompt. So you explain what your tool looks like and what you want. And And then I gave it this. I don't want it to look like a generic CSS framework, which was what that other thing was. And it gave me this, which looks like all the other map tools, but at least it's a little bit sharper, right? And then really there was the question of, well, now what do I do with this thing? Is it just for me, or should I put it out there? And of course the questions are, can I do any harm if it gives out the wrong information? It's probably negligible if I have the wrong information about lane swim times. And then the bigger one is, what is my commitment to maintain it? So I actually ran it privately for about 6 weeks with some friends, and just to see if it would break. And it was still living, and they hadn't changed the data, and I mean, they hadn't changed the data model in a long time. So I thought I'd set up the data feed and make it live. And so now it looks like this. And that's at recfinderto.ca, everyone. So there are a couple of things that I learned from this. One is, seeing it in this view, it gave a very interesting perspective on the spatial access of recreation programs. And if you're interested in, like, why is there a knitting program over there? Is that because they had a staff person that could do that, or does that reflect the needs of that community? How come this part of the town has swimming early in the morning, but this other part of town doesn't? So there's sort of there's a lot to dig into if you're interested in the sort of access and equity piece. The other thing is, I learned what people are looking for. So we'll do a little bit of lightning round Family Feud here. Does anyone want to take a guess at what the #1 search is on RecFinderTO?
Childcare.
Well, so these are just like drop-in recreation. So like in tennis is not in the top 8, unfortunately, but that might be a time of year thing as well. Yep. Pickleball's in there. Yeah. Swimming is in there. Yeah. Skating at this time of year for sure. Yeah. Volleyball. Oh, you guys are getting all of them. What's the #1 though? Basketball. Yeah, basketball's #1. Badminton, pickleball. And that's like in the winter. Can you imagine what pickleball's like in the summer? And then here are the rest of your. So I'm sure the city of Toronto already knows this, but it was interesting for me. Just a couple of wrap-up things. Just some known limitations about this. Not all the locations are in the drop-in locations data set, because places like Nathan Phillips Square are not actually recreation facilities. So it shows up in the list, but not on the map. I haven't gotten any complaints yet, but that's just something to know about. And this is where I found out that the open data and the website are not actually connected to each other. Is one day I went to go for a swim, and there was a cancellation for lifeguard training, and sure enough, the website was up to date, but my app was not. So always check the real site, if you want to validate if things are right. And then I think the other thing that was just interesting, which I found out afterwards, which is maybe a bit of a thing to think about, is there are actually 3 other sites that do this already. They all do it a little bit differently. One guy did it after me, and he was also solving the swimming problem. So swimmers like to, clearly it's a swimming problem. Where do I find a pool that's open? But there's this big question when we think about AI slop as like creating things that are useless. Is there a world where there's AI slop where we're all creating things that are useful, but like there's too many of them? So it's a weird sort of question. And then I think just the enabling conditions, really it's just remarkable, the data that's on the City of Toronto's open data portal. I investigated whether I could roll this out to any other city. This data does not exist in any other major city in Canada. There's a guy scraping the Ottawa website to create a data set like that, but like otherwise not open. And the other enabling factor was this doesn't cost me a penny to run. It's running off GitHub. The automation to pull the data is on the GitHub free tier. And it's just sort of remarkable that this is possible now. And that's my story of how I went from vibe no to vibe go. I just made that up. Yeah.
Okay, this is really cool. This is very amazing and solves so many needs. I love that you can do like this week and whatnot. Just like the time frame is great. Where do you imagine taking, if you were to take this data further, if you were to add another layer or add something else, what would you do?
Oh, that's a good question. I think there are two things that I looked for data that I couldn't find. One is there are some free facilities, depending on the neighborhood, that's posted on their websites, but there isn't actually an open data source for that. So being able to indicate where services are free and where you have to pay. And I think a multilingual implementation would be the other thing for access. So those are the two that I would say are on a roadmap for a product that, as you can see, I would just say I wouldn't recommend building like this. This was, like in our work, we wireframe and mock up our things before we build them. We don't just like build something and let an AI thing design it for us. So, but it is interesting that you can make more of those meandering turns and not feel like you've cost yourself a lot of time.
Yeah, awesome. So my question is, I think this workflow, I'm a designer and I think this workflow like with vibe coding looks very interesting to like non-engineers. Like I'm a designer, you said prototyping is a good way for prototyping. I find that like I have a lot of ideas for problems that I can solve through wireframes and prototypes, but not necessarily for a fully engineered solution. I guess my question is, if you didn't have like deep engineering expertise, what would be the most important things to know when you start vibe coding like this? Where would someone like me start learning?
That's a good question. I think there are different work. If you're like a coder, you can, I would say I took a bit of a coding approach to this and I did it incrementally and I tackled it the way I would have built it. There are um, like low code vibe coding tools. I think that's the great place to start, where you don't even have to worry about being in a development environment. You don't have to um, worry about what the code is at all. And that's a great way to get a sense of what it could build. And if it creates code for you, you could then take that out and take that somewhere else. I'm blanking on some names of these low coding, but if anyone here has any like low coding AI tools that you is Lovable, is that, am I getting that right? Lovable is one of them. Yeah. So I don't know if I'm mentioning old news and you're like, I know that already, but those are just to know there's a wide spectrum of these types of tools.
All right. Yeah, I have used Lovable and Replit. Yeah, thanks.
And just another round of applause for Daniel.
Thank you.